All right. Hello, and welcome back to Screen Guardians, the podcast where parents and law enforcement share tips and stories for protecting our children in this increasingly digital world. Today's podcast topic is titled Exposed: The Link Between Porn and the Sex Trafficking Industry. All right, I'm your host, Katie. I'm a mom, former nurse, business owner in the online space, and also an advocate for the safety of children and promotion of digital health. Of course, I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Kevin, who is not only a dad, but a law enforcement veteran for the past 15 years. Kevin serves on the ICAC, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. He is a squad leader and ballistic shield operator and firearms instructor for SWAT. He has a master's degree in forensic psychology. And if that's not enough, he holds many certifications through the FBI. He's a certification of crisis intervention team. He's certified for responding to issues with those in mental health crisis. Advanced digital forensic analysis for the iOS and Android operating system, very pertinent to our podcast here. He is a force science analyst and currently serves on the Use of Force Review Board for his agency. And he's currently enrolled in the McAfee Institute Certified Expert in Cyber Crime Investigation, the CECI program. And if that's not enough, he's also in jiu-jitsu and a very active and present father in his children's lives. So four children, father of four. So Kevin, so glad you're here. Your bio deserved all that time and attention because it's very, very impressive. And I don't think I've done you enough given you enough credit in sharing all of the things that you are accomplished in and do, because it brings a lot of wisdom and knowledge to the subject matter. So I felt like it was important to give you that full minute of explaining who you are and what you do. So thank you, and
Awesome.
thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Make me sound way cooler than I actually am.
No, you're cool. I know you. You're a cool guy.
Uh,
So this topic is kind of heavy, right? So exposed sex, the link between porn and sex trafficking. Some of us as parents feel like, oh, my kids are little. This is something I don't have to think about. I live in, suburbia, and this is something that only happens in the outskirts of the world. But that's not actually true, is it?
no, it's not. As a matter of fact, the U.S. Department of State said that the average age of entry into pornography and into prostitution is 12 years of age, with some being as young as 5, which is kind of a terrifying statistic. Um, and yeah, and a lot of this stems from this generation being overly sexualized. And we see uh, a lot of instances where topics are being introduced to kids at a very young age that are piquing their interest in ways that, in my opinion, based on my training and education, we shouldn't be um, encouraging that interest yet. And unfortunately, with the sexualization of our culture, um, teens are participating in sex at a far younger age than ever before. They're experimenting with more deviant forms of sexuality. And the latest statistic shows that kids are watching pornography beginning in late elementary school. So we're talking fourth, fifth grade, probably, which is scary for me having kids that are that age. And a lot of this is a cultural thing when you have children who have access to the internet consistently and very few safeguards. They come across things that we as parents don't want them to come across, or even scarier, they're introduced to things by other adults who are looking to potentially prey on them in various ways.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole different world from when we were kids. When we were kids, it was like maybe there was like I don't know, a magazine that someone found, that like
Yes.
a dad, an uncle, whatever magazine, right? But
Yep.
now with these little computers in our pockets, right? Like access to things are, like erotic pictures can
Mhm.
be found accidentally or by intentionally searching it for it. So I'm just going to define porn real quick, just so we're all clear. The depiction to pornography is the depiction of erotic behavior, as in pictures or writing intended to cause sexual excitement. Material such as books or photography that depicts erotic behavior and is intended to cause, all the things. Um, so pornography, there's multiple kinds, right? So meaning like adult pornography, but then there's child pornography, which is in
Mhm.
fact illegal.
Yeah. So what I have found in my research is that pornography is kind of the driving force behind the international sex trafficking industry. Women and children, so you're talking about adult porn and child porn, both women and children are often rented out to form the or to film these videos, create pornographic material, and then that material obviously is distributed, and there's a market for it. Now with adult pornography, obviously it's legal, so it's distributed on websites and various apps, etc. Child porn, on the other hand, is usually distributed via Telegram links or uh, other encrypted type applications. Mega is one of them. You can send links via Mega, or even the deep web and the dark web, which most people don't really know about or understand. But there's various ways to access the deep web and the dark web, which hosts websites that you can't get to from the regular internet. And so then those are the ways that this child pornography, which is referred to as child sexual abuse material, CSAM now, technically. I still call it child porn, but it's frowned upon, I guess, from an academic standpoint, I guess, to call it child porn, because calling it porn insinuates some type of consent, like with adult porn. Anyway, so CSAM, um, and it's distributed through less uh, less than legal means.
And your statement about consent is actually something that in my research and preparation for this conversation today, I think that's not only pornography is, I think I read like a $97 billion industry.
It's
And
bigger
it
than
does,
all professional sports combined.
wow, that's unbelievable.
It it brings in more revenue, more money. More is spent on pornography in a year than the NFL, the MLB. Um, if you took all professional sports and combined them revenue wise, pornography brings in more.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I read that most people who consume pornography, you can't assume people who participate in pornography are condoning the acts that are going on in the filming or whatever, the photography, any of the so I read that oftentimes people go in to be a part of it, sometimes by choice or unknowingly, that they're going to
Mhm.
be photographed or in video that is turned into pornography. So if people rationalize the use of pornography saying it's consensual acts, when in all actuality you can't prove that, and oftentimes, especially with underage, um, pornography, children in pornography, they're not consenting. They're not of age to
Yeah.
consent.
Nope.
And oftentimes some of the people who they believe they're adult, you don't know their actual age, right? So you
Mhm.
can't say whether you're not for certain that is a female that is of age to make an informed decision and consent to being in it. So it's messy. I mean, it's crazy to me. I had no idea.
Yeah, at one point, one of the largest online pornography hosting websites, and I'm not going to name the name because I don't know whether or not I'll get in trouble for it. But they ended up having to at one point shut their site down and go through and purge, I want to say, over 50% of their videos, for that very reason. An investigation was done, and they could not prove that the individuals in those videos were adults. And so what ended up happening was they had to institute a whole new way of vetting their actresses, to ensure that they were actually putting 18-year-old women on their website, or older, obviously. Um, but it's an issue in the industry because the common thought is, well, if she says she's 18 and she signs this piece of paper, then we're good, right? Doesn't matter if it's true or not. She said she was. We have no reason not to believe her. She signed the piece of paper. But there's so much coercion that goes on in the pornography industry, and there's a whole bunch of documentaries on the porn industry, with former actresses who come out and they basically say that, like, a lot of what I ended up doing was not what I signed up for, but I was coerced because it was my means of feeding myself, or there was some threats, or there was other types of coercion. They got me high before the scene, and so then I didn't even know really what was happening. So everybody assumes that when they hop on their favorite porn site, that the videos they're watching are consensual videos, because that's the assumption. And the reality is, like you mentioned, is that's not often the case. And as a matter of fact, I would say that it's uh, probably rarely the case that it's a 100% consensual encounter. Um, and then, like you mentioned with children, obviously, it doesn't matter if a child says yes, they can't consent. They're not psychologically or emotionally developed enough to make that decision. But that doesn't stop child predators from doing it anyway.
Right.
And these traffickers are smart about their recruitment strategies. So they play on a person's psychological vulnerabilities, right? So specifically children and younger teens, they have specific desires for acceptance, right? Love, recognition, oftentimes money, because most of them probably come from a home that's uh, not very well off financially, potentially below the poverty line. And so that makes them an easy target, because these traffickers can come through and they can be the white knight that comes in and saves the day, right? I love you. I want to give you attention. I think you're wonderful. I think you're beautiful. As a matter of fact, here's $100 on your Cash App to go buy you something nice, right? And then eventually, uh, the spiral occurs, the grooming intensifies, and then there's a sense of, well, I owe it to this person because I love them and they've been so kind to me and they've given me all these things, and now I kind of owe it to this person to be involved in this. And then you add the early sexualization through media, whether that's books with explicit content, or the movies that Hollywood puts out, or even commercials. I mean, the Super Bowl's coming up. Some of those commercials are sexualized.
Yeah.
Um, and you add the early sexualization through media to small children and young teens' psychological vulnerabilities, and you have somebody that's ripe for some type of a sex trafficking situation. Um, and I think it's important too that people know that human trafficking or sex trafficking is not necessarily what we imagine it to be. The movie Sound of Freedom was a fantastic movie, but those types of trafficking instances are very, very, very rare. Um, and but that's what people think about when they think about sex trafficking, right? So when I tell you that, like, I've worked child sex trafficking cases here in my jurisdiction, In the Kansas City metro area, people are like, well, no way that type of stuff happens in our neighborhoods. But they're picturing a sensationalized idea of sex trafficking, right? Not what is actually considered sex trafficking. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So, to kind of pull us back a little bit, like I know we're going to talk about the link between sex trafficking and porn and how they go
Yeah.
together, right? Like how they
Yep.
lead to each other. But first, I want to talk about mention how pornography is much different. And when people think of pornography today, it's much different than it was like 10, 15 years ago. I don't even
Oh
know.
yeah.
I have no knowledge, but all I do know from my research is it's incredibly violent, right? That it's and the exposure of children to pornography. So children seeing pornography at a young age, like studies are showing, is dangerous because it is creating these false ideas and narrative as to what sex is, the violence of it, how women could or should be treated,
Hmm.
and it's very damaging, from all the
Yeah,
studies that I have read and heard from specialists.
and it's unrealistic,
It's unrealistic.
right? It's not what real sex is or should be. Anybody who's in a healthy marriage that has a healthy sex life knows that it's very, very rare. Now, I'm sure there are couples out there, and whatever, but to each their own. But the sex that you see in porn is so wildly unrealistic that children, specifically girls, if they start to watch pornography, they then develop these unrealistic expectations of what their body should be able to do, and what they should allow someone to do to them, right?
Yeah.
Because it's what they see as sex, because they've been sexualized at too early of an age to understand that it's fake.
Right. Right. So, I read something that said it's not if your children will be exposed to porn, it's when.
Hmm.
And so that's why having knowledge that this is a thing that's probably going to happen in our kids' lifetime, that they're going to be exposed to it. Common Sense Media wrote an article and it says, and did a study last year, and it said 15% of children first saw porn online at the age of 10 or younger. The average age reported for seeing pornography is 12.
Hmm.
44% of those surveyed saw porn intentionally, and 58% had seen it accidentally. So whether they're stumbling across it or they're seeking it out, it's being found. And so in the conversation, and we're going to provide some information as like tips as to how to have these conversations with our kids to protect them.
Hmm.
But I want to go from kids are seeing pornography, they're developing these unrealistic beliefs and understanding of what sex is, how to act, what to do, all these things, right? And then how is that linked to sex trafficking? How does that being exposed to pornography open them up to being at risk to exposure or potentially like victim to sex trafficking? How can you link the two for us?
So early sexualization through things like pornography and the media leads to higher rates of experimentation with more deviant forms of sexual activity, right? We're not just talking about a teenage boy discovering masturbation, right? We're talking about a young girl who thinks that it's normal for a woman to have sex with two people at the same time. And so once they start experimenting, it kind of desensitizes them to what is appropriate and what's not appropriate with conversations that they have outside of the home or on the internet. And we've talked about that before in the past too, that the internet, as prevalent as the internet has become and as easy as it is for adults to be able to contact children on the internet, what happens is once a child is sexualized at an early age, they start to experiment. Um, they start to think that they're a little bit bigger and more experienced and older than they really are. And these adults, child predators, they specifically seek out young kids who give off that older, more mature kind of vibe, right? And so then the conversation between the adult and the child starts on the internet 99% of the time. Um, and the child gets to the point where they've gone too far to really back out. And a lot of times these kids don't even realize that they have gotten to a point where they're wrapped up in this inappropriate conversation with an adult because they don't know what's appropriate and inappropriate anymore. So then the idea is the trafficker or the child predator gets to know them. They play the white knight role that we talked about earlier, and then eventually they want to try to meet up with the child. And the child who um, probably doesn't have a whole lot of positive, uh, interaction with adults in their own life, a lot of times will start to really connect with this adult because they've given them this love, the money, the attention, the sweet comments, the good morning, beautiful texts. And so they start to trust them at a deep level. So then meeting up with them doesn't seem like a big deal. And so then you end up with a situation where a child either runs away from home or regularly meets up with their abuser outside of the home. Um, but the scary thing is a statistic that I want to cite is according to Rescue Her, which is an organization that tries to combat sex trafficking. They did a study, and in 2016, 1 in 3 runaways are picked up within 48 hours and lured into the sex industry. So when you have a child who is sexualized at an early age, begins talking to adults on the internet, gets involved in this grooming relationship, and then agrees to meet the adult, 1 in every 3 girls who run away from home to meet their white knight end up being picked up and lured into the sex trafficking industry. Um, and the reality is that for the first, you know, a little bit of time. I don't know how long, but for the first chunk of time that they're involved in the industry, they don't even realize they're involved in the industry because they implicitly trust this person that has scooped them up. And this person just tells them that, oh, no, this is fine. This is okay. Everything's good. And they don't believe that this person would hurt them. And so when you go from, oh, they're just looking at porn, it's not a big deal, to all the way to the sex trafficking side of things, there's a lot of stops in between there, right? And so we as adults have to recognize when a child is on that spectrum, and we have to be able to intervene before they get to the extreme side of the spectrum and they want to actually meet this adult that they've been talking to. Um, Another study that I read by Noel Bush in 2017, he correlated the number of clicks on porn sites with the increases in the global sex trade. So what he found was that as pornography became more popular, the global sex trade also increased in the amount of money that was made and the number of cases of sex trafficking. And so, while that is not necessarily a direct link, it's definitely a correlation.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I think I also read that the trafficking industry is also generates $99 billion a year, and that's probably global. But I don't believe that's just the U.S. I believe that's global, which is
Yeah,
crazy. They're
yeah,
basically
it's
like the same. They're both at $100 billion industries each.
yeah,
Um,
and they correlate with each other. I mean, they track with each other because a lot of the videos that you see on your favorite porn sites, unknowingly, what you're watching is somebody who's being sex trafficked. They're being paid very little, if any at all, or they're just working for their food and a roof over their head. Um, which, you know, you think about this stuff happening in our neighborhoods. Um, and like I said earlier, people don't think about the instances of sex trafficking that occur when, a runaway who's 14 goes and stays with her best friend for a little while, who happens to live with her 21-year-old brother. And then the 21-year-old brother starts feeding and taking care of the girls, and then somehow insinuates that like he wants something in return. And this girl, she's 14 or 15, right? She's seen a whole bunch of porn, so she feels mature in terms of her sexuality. So then she starts agreeing to these things almost in return for him taking care of her, and then those videos get distributed. Those are the types of trafficking instances that people don't think about, but by statute, that is still sex trafficking because it's providing anything of value um, to a child for sexual gratification in return, um, or or providing anything of value to somebody else for sexual gratification from a child. So the key is the exchange of something of value for the sex act. When it comes to children, obviously the adult pornography industry, we talked about that. Not all of them are sex trafficked, and they still receive payment. So that's a different type of thing. But when we're talking about kids, the instances of sex trafficking that occur the most often are not the ones that people imagine. Like the movie Sound of Freedom, or a kid
Yeah.
getting
Taken.
kidnapped in the middle of the night and sold to
Yes.
Russian,
Yeah.
sex traffickers, that kind of a thing. It does happen, but it's not that's not the type of sex trafficking that I'm focused on. And it's not the most prevalent.
Right. Yeah, I
So
saw the movie Taken, and that totally, like, scared the what out of me.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
s
I like that movie a lot too. It's funny though, once you've been in law enforcement, or you've been in the military, or some type of a tactical community, it's funny to watch those movies, because they're incredibly entertaining, but they're so unrealistic in terms of a gunfight, or what you can and can't do crossing international borders and stuff like that. So
Got it,
anyway,
yeah.
funny movie, but
The Hollywood version, right? And
yes,
not
yes,
reality, but the Hollywood version.
yep.
Um, okay, so just to pull back a little bit, so just, from when you say pornography links the link to sex trafficking. It's so the pornography and the exposure to pornography desensitizes children or any viewer for the most part, but we're talking about children in this instant. It desensitizes them towards sexual violence. And right now,
Mhm.
pornography is incredibly violent.
Yep.
So, what that does is it normalizes this crude, dangerous behavior, and which allows them to kind of opens a door for them to
Mhm.
see it as normal, instead of seeing sex as something that was originally intended, what it was originally intended to be. It kind of makes it this violent, scary, power like struggle kind of thing,
It becomes a means to an end, is
and it means
what
to an
it.
end. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and that exposure opens up doors for children to potentially not see any red flags and normalizes a behavior that's dangerous. And when children are potentially on a path towards sex trafficking, in your experience, where does that start? So it's seeing pornography, and then it's they're getting messaged on a social media platform,
Mhm.
they're being asked to share pictures. Like, what is the process that you're seeing commonly? I think I read somewhere that oftentimes sex trafficking happens not from just strangers, but it's actually somebody who knows the child,
Yeah.
potentially a trusted person or a family member.
Mhm.
Can you share
Yeah.
more about that and what you're experiencing and what you're seeing? So again, parents like us know, oh my gosh,
Yeah. So I'll use a specific example to kind of talk about it. Um, and this is an example of a case where the suspect was using the app Say Hi, which is it's really no different than any other communication app. You hop on, you find people that you think look interesting, and then you can send them a message, and then you can direct message back and forth. But this suspect was basically trolling for young girls in an effort to offer them shelter, food, marijuana, money. He'd buy them lots of things. But the idea was that he would go pick them up, he'd bring them back to his house, he'd shower them with gifts and all this stuff, give them a place to stay in return for sex. Um, and he ended up reaching out to an undercover detective's profile out of Minnesota, and this undercover detective reached out to me and said, "Hey, this guy lives in your area. These are the messages that he and I had. It may be a good idea for you to follow up on it."
So
So I
he's
went,
messaging the guy in Minnesota thinking he's the guy in Minnesota is a young, like, teenage girl.
yes, yes.
Okay.
So a lot of times, detectives that are involved in this type of casework will create various fake accounts pretending to be 13, 14-year-old girls on all of the major social media applications and some of these smaller ones, because if a suspect reaches out to us thinking we're a child, um, then we can obviously pursue that within the law, but we can pursue that and end up charging them with a crime and taking them off the streets before they ever actually get a hold of a real child. So it's proactive work. And so I went on Say Hi. I created a profile of a 14-year-old female. And my intention was just to kind of stalk this guy and gather some basic information on him. But the same day that I created a profile, he sent me a direct message with the same type of messaging that he had been chatting with this undercover Minnesota detective about, which the statistical probability that this guy would have stumbled across me and then sent me a message the same way he sent this Minnesota detective a message is really incredible. But he did. And so the way my conversation with him went was he started by um, easing into the grooming, right? And so we're chatting. He's asking me about what my favorite this is and what my favorite that is. And then the conversation turns to my home life. And this is always something I see with these guys is they want to know, um, do you have a good relationship with your parents? Right. And we've talked about that in past episodes. That if I say I have a good relationship with my dad, I probably won't hear back from this guy again. And so I've always told them that, oh, my dad's not in the picture anymore and my mom's a bitch. And that usually uh, causes kind of I don't know, an increase in the number of messages, and things kind of pick up speed a little bit because they're excited now because they found a good target. Um, so he ended up asking me for nude images and sexually explicit videos, etc. And so I had enough to charge him with a felony, and so I submitted it for charging. So case closed, right? But what ends up happening is I get his social media search warrants and I start looking through his messaging and I find a real 12-year-old female victim who lives in my jurisdiction or close to my jurisdiction. And she was chatting with this guy at the same time as I was chatting with him. And he used all the same grooming techniques on the Minnesota detective, on me, and on this 12-year-old little girl. And unfortunately, he found out that she hated her mom. Her mom had multiple boyfriends in and out of the house. And so he very in a very chivalrous manner, he says, "You should just come stay with me. You don't need to stay with her. I'll give you a roof over your head. I'll treat you well." So he goes to her city, picks her up, transports her an hour back to his house. And she stayed there for multiple days and nights, and engaged in all kinds of different sexual activity in exchange for food, shelter, and some small gifts that he gave her. Um, the scary part about those messages was there are various instances where you can tell she is very uncomfortable with the sex acts that they're talking about, but she doesn't feel like she can say that, probably because she has been overly sexualized and wanted to appear more mature than she really was. So she goes to his house and they have sex. And there were numerous times where it got incredibly rough and violent. And she would tell him, like, hey, that hurts, or I don't like that. And he would continue anyway under the guise of, well, everybody does this. And it just, sometimes sex gets that way. And so she started second guessing herself about what was appropriate and what felt good and what was comfortable and what she consented to. Um, and so, long story short, we ended up arresting him and interviewing him. And he ended up going to prison for 23 years. However, 23 years is a big number, but this little girl is now traumatized for the rest of her life. Um, and so, when you ask about, like, how do these things happen, the key points to take away from that case is that, number one, she never should have been chatting on an obscure app like Say Hi. Keep your kids on well-known apps that you recognize and you're comfortable using yourself, because that way you know where to look and how to review their communications with people. Um, we've talked about this 100 times. Remove unknown friends. Um, her mom, in the messages between her and the suspect, her mom was hardly ever involved. I don't think her mom knew for the first few days that she had even been picked up and taken. Um, and so, yeah, it's unreal. And one of the bigger things is check for hidden messaging apps, apps within apps. So one thing that people don't know is Snapchat. Once you download Snapchat, which I hate Snapchat anyway, but once you download Snapchat, you can go into Snapchat and you can create another account on a social media app called Hoop. You don't have to download another app. You just download Snapchat. Then you can access Hoop. Hoop is basically Tinder, but it's Snapchat's version of Tinder. You swipe right, you swipe left, you find people that you think are hot, people that you don't think are hot, and it's very, very sexualized. Um, Anybody with Snapchat has access to Hoop, and people don't know that. So their kid downloads Snapchat, and you see that your kid's on Snapchat. But what you don't realize is that they also have access to this sexual dating app. And you never even had to approve them to download that app because it comes with Snapchat. So
Wow. Are you guys
do it.
finding a lot of cases are and inappropriate conversations are happening on Hoop?
Um, well, not
Or is it so new?
necessarily, because it's relatively new, and a lot of the individuals interacting on Hoop are adults. But kids who have access to Snapchat theoretically could set up a Hoop profile, and interact with adults. Um, and so Snapchat in general, my kids won't have Snapchat. Snapchat in general is designed to send messages that are deleted and
Inappropriate?
secretive and inappropriate. I mean,
Yeah,
it's designed for that.
yeah,
And so then for them to have a dating app hidden within Snapchat,
yeah,
to me, it smacks of um,
yeah,
facilitating these
yes,
inappropriate type relationships. Um,
yeah. That's what it feels like to
and
me.
yeah, yeah. And then lastly, I would say check into your kids' absences. If your kid doesn't show up for dinner, that's a problem, right? Um, the top three apps that I recommend are Life 360, Bark, or Aura, AURA, to track your child's location regularly. All of my kids, if they have a device, they're on Life 360, and at any time I can open up Life 360 and I can pinpoint exactly on the map where their device is located. And if they hop in the car and go for a drive, it gives me a report about the number of times they sped, the number of times they braked too hard. I mean, it's a really great app to track your kids' location and your kids' behavior. But those are the types of proactive things that, unfortunately, parents have to do nowadays to prevent situations like the case study that we just spoke about. But it's an unfortunate situation where we feel like we have to basically put a tracking device on our on our children.
Yeah.
So
No, it's
um,
true. Thank you for sharing all those. We'll go ahead and like make sure those are in the show notes and have a link to some of these products. We have Bark, and I like Bark. I'm interested in the Life 360, so we'll look into that. So um, to kind of conclude this conversation today, I mean, obviously, conversations to proactive conversations with their children about pornography is important. Helping, obviously, having conversations about development, puberty, the sex, all that stuff is important. Probably first, and then you can have some softer conversations about pornography without going into all that. There are some great resources and books. Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is one that we have here in our house.
mhm.
There's two different versions, one for younger kids. I think it's like 4 to 7, and then older kids, maybe like 8 to 12 or some 13, something like that. So we'll link those. Also, they're again good books to read together as a family and talk, kind of introduce the idea in the conversations. And for us, we just, I just encourage parents like, I think I talked to Nora, my daughter, about it. Like, have you ever heard of the word pornography? And we just sort of softly talked about it and just
Mhm.
to see what knowledge she has. As parents, we go in kind of curious to kind of see what their knowledge and understanding is, and then help be the ones that help form their knowledge and understanding. Because
Yes.
studies show if we become the trusted source, then they will consistently go to us with questions and all that stuff. If they get their knowledge and source of information elsewhere, then they're less likely to come to you to seek knowledge and find it.
Yep.
Do you have
And that
anything to add
actually
to that?
happens. Yeah, that happens in my home. My oldest son is 13, and he and I have had numerous conversations from the time he was about 10 years old about any of his temptations to look at pornography or any of his issues, with girls at school or whatever the situation is. I have become his person to go to, and so there have been a number of times where he has come upstairs from his basement bedroom and said, hey, uh, I probably shouldn't have access to screens tonight because I'm feeling kind of tempted to look at some things I shouldn't look at. And so we're very open about it in our home. And obviously our rules are that screens aren't allowed in bedrooms or anything anyway. But his openness to say like, hey, just so you know, I'm struggling with this tonight and I don't want to make a silly mistake. So um, if I ask for my phone later, you should probably say no, or say, the openness has been really good. Or he'll come upstairs and say, hey, I'm feeling tempted. Will you pray with me to try to see if I can um, get rid of the temptations, or whatever the case is. But the idea is that because he's able to come to me about those things and not feel shame, um, then he's not going to go get his information from other adults or friends who don't really know what they're talking about. And I guess that's the only other point that I would want to make is when you're talking to your kids about this, don't turn it into a shameful thing. It's very natural and it's very important that they go through this stage of development. And they need to be explained to that. it's okay to be tempted by these things. To say that us as adults we're never tempted by sexual images, or is a lies, and they need to know that, and they need to know a healthy way to kind of overcome that. So yeah. Anyway, communication
Right.
is
No,
so important.
it's so important, and I appreciate you sharing that, and I commend you and the way you're leading your family. And it's
Thank
true.
you.
Like we talk about how, even when in the small short conversations we've had, brief about pictures, you're going to be tempted. You might see something online, or you might see a picture, and you're going to be curious,
Hmm.
and you're going to want to look more at it, and you're going to be tempted. Like it's going to be
Hmm.
something and it's natural. That is
Yeah, that's
natural.
okay.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
it's
okay.
okay. Yeah.
But yeah, but just like, and I give the analogy of just like you like chocolate cake, and it tastes good, and it feels good to eat chocolate cake. We can't have chocolate cake at dinner, like for dinner, and then again at breakfast, right? Like we
Yep.
have to. So the desire and want and the pleasure that comes from something isn't bad.
Hmm.
It's having boundaries around that are and our moral foundation is a part of what creates those boundaries and the rules of our household. And we can talk about how we don't like this rule right now. This rule is
Yeah.
not working for me right now, but I'm going to abide by it, or I'm going to challenge it. Like, right. But we will have that conversation. So
Yep.
this is a great conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Um, I really appreciate it. So again, this is all happening in our backyards. Being aware, being educated on the subject matter, so we can further protect and continue to protect our community and our children. Thank you for joining us today. Please make sure that you share this podcast with somebody who might need to hear this, or you think would benefit from hearing and gaining education, because education will help keep our community safe as well as our children. Please make sure you're subscribing to our podcast and our content. And again, resources will be listed in the show notes. And like and subscribe on social media as well. All right. Thank you,
All
Kevin, for
right.
your time
Thank you,
today.
everyone. Bye
All
bye.
right. Until next time, take care.